welcome to the show, man. Good to have
Thanks for
you.
having me.
Absolutely. So, really enjoyed the record. You got a copy of it. So incredible. So,
Awesome. Thanks so much.
yeah, no doubt. So, if you could tell me sort of about the concept of the record, how it all came to be. We'll start there.
Sure, sure. So actually, it all started, I guess, from a show that a collective of friends was putting at the time. It was right before the pandemic. It was like the show was scheduled for March 7th, 2020, and they invited me to do something. They had a little grant, which, like, now looking back at it, I'm like, it was a joke, like in terms of like actually trying to put a serious project together. But I just took the opportunity to be like, I've had this idea for a band with strings like for a long time, and I was really attracted to the idea of like putting myself as part of a section for a change. And that was kind of the jumping off point, just thinking about a string trio with like cello and violin. And I started kind of collecting the music for that. And I had a bunch that I have written on a trip to Berlin right before that. And it all kind of seemed to have a very similar vibe and aesthetic. So it started from just like, I guess always you have a deadline for a performance, and then you get stuff done. Otherwise, you're just not gonna get it done. So for me,
Right.
that was an awesome opportunity. And yeah, a lot of the music came from that, just that texture, and like figuring out how I could be kind of in the middle of a band. That's something I really, really like. I feel like in whatever project I'm playing on, I'm kind of thinking like, how do I contribute to the music, not as a guitarist only, but as a voice in the music,
Right,
wherever it
right.
needs to be.
Yeah. I mean, it comes through for sure, and it's like, I mean, clearly you're a very gifted guitar player, uh, but it's not overwhelmingly like a guitar record. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's you're part
Mm-hmm.
of the ensemble. I mean, yes, you're featured quite a few of the tracks, but yeah, it does have like a collaborative, collective vibe to it, which I appreciated.
Nice, nice. That's awesome to hear. It comes across. I think that it was a project that I was very excited about the possibilities of orchestration and arranging, which I sometimes kind of lack in more modern jazz situations. I feel like improvisation takes a big role, and that's great. And obviously, that's the background I come from. But I think I was always more attracted to music and like records that had a little bit more, let's say, attention to detail when it comes to the execution and the collective movement of how we are expressing what we're trying to express. Whereas I feel sometimes a composition could just be a vehicle for improvisation, which
Right.
is which is cool. But I wanted to find a middle ground between those two and have spaces for myself and the people in the group to kind of commit to a certain um, textural quality or a weight or a certain interesting groove that kind of revolves around itself in different ways. So that's where a lot of the music came from trying to find kind of this meditative aspect of some cells, you know.
Yeah, yeah, I think you achieved it. I mean, in some of my notes, I talk about meditative, introspective,
Oh,
uh,
nice.
this counterpunctual aspect. It's not jazz in the sense of let's get through the head and just jam on the form and come back to the head. It's much more than that. It's a chamber based, I would say. But yeah,
Yeah.
jazz it still has that jazz element, of course. You're the jazz instruments for sure, but yeah, I
Yeah.
think you did something pretty special with it. If you could, talk about some of the musicians and kind of how you hooked up with them. Besides like
Yeah.
did you know them before this collective project happened, or how did you?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, all these musicians I had kind of like longer relationships with and collaborated with in some ways in the past. I think most prominently David Leon, who plays alto sax and flute. Um, we met when Cornelia's Street Cafe was still open in New York. We just met at a show, and he just moved there. And I can't even tell you how it progressed, but all of a sudden, like half a year later, we were in like 3, 4 bands together.
Right, right.
A band by like Adam O'Farrell and a great bassist from Germany, Lisa Hoppe, was then living in New York. And now I'm playing in another one of his bands, and he's playing in my band. So we have a very close relationship, personally and collaborative wise. And he's someone who's also very geared towards that chamber thinking, who always thinks about, okay, how do I match my tone? How do I match my phrasing? What is my role? Can I sound like a bus? Can I sound like a bird? Can it be really ugly to the point where no one can take it anymore? And could it be the most sublime, soft, like, he can do all of that. So that was kind of clear for me, to have him on board and be kind of a lead voice. And then Lida, I also knew for a little bit, who plays violin. She's an amazing composer, band leader, has her own string quartet that's been running for years. So she comes from that background heavily, much more from the classical world, but we met through a band of Nick Dunstan, great bass player who used to live in New York, now in Berlin. So we recorded a record called Atlantic Extraction. And that was very much improvisation based, with like some compositions, of course, that we were kind of leaning on. But I knew she could do pretty much everything, and she thinks as a composer, and she could improvise, so that was very clear. And then Irene, I got to meet after the pandemic. She played cello on the record, and she plays with Lida at the quartet, at Bergamot Quartet, so it was kind of an obvious choice, and like super amazing sound, really versatile too. So she jumped into it even though it was very foreign to her at first, this kind of music. Yeah, go ahead, please.
No, 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 no. I'm listening. I'm enjoying.
Okay, cool. So yeah, that was pretty obvious to get someone who blends with Lida like really strongly, and they already have this like movement together, and like, you know, they feel and think in the same way. And Rogerio, him I actually know probably the longest, but it took us a bit of time to play together. I met him through his daughter, also a great musician, Anne Bucato, that I met at the Siena Jazz Workshops. And my last day, I told her, hey, I'm moving to New York right after this. This was 2014, summer 2014. And then I somehow met her dad. I didn't even know he's an unbelievable percussion player, which I think made it easier to kind of connect when you don't have, you know, that impression of like, oh my God, like this guy. And we became close a little bit through that, and then some random gigs I used to do at the bar next door. I remember we did something with him and Caroline Davis at the time. And then through my obsession of Brazilian music that has been very strong the past 2-3 years, we kind of connected a lot through this band and others.
Cool. Now, do you plan on performing with this band? Is there any dates upcoming?
Yeah, so we have a record release in New York at the Jazz Gallery, April 10th. So that'll be the official release. We'll have records, probably going to play a bit of new music also. And we have also a show at Firehouse 12 in New Haven, which I believe is May 12th. What is it? It's the beginning of May.
Okay.
But those are the two shows we have currently. May 2nd, yeah, at Firehouse.
Cool. So the two songs that were designated for release, the first one I have here is "Hymn for Tomorrow."
Yeah.
Can you talk about that piece and how it came about?
Sure. This is actually funny because this piece, I guess, was born almost from another deadline, which was the recording session. I had the guitar line that starts the whole song that you hear me play alone in the beginning once through. I had that for like, I think, close to a year, and I really loved it, and I loved the cycle of it. but I just couldn't, I didn't know what to do about a melody. It felt like too good on its own. I almost didn't like want to ruin it somehow.
Yeah.
Um, but it obviously wasn't a piece that way. And I remember like literally 2 weeks, 3 weeks maybe before the recording session, I kind of locked myself for 2 days in the rehearsal space and just played that riff and recorded a bunch of voice memos of me just singing and slowly picked at that melody. Um, and I didn't even have the second part, which becomes kind of like this really heavy pedal point rock type of thing, drop D on the guitar, all the strings just hammering in like quarter notes. I had a different idea for that section, which came, I think, a lot more from the mind than the heart. At first, it was, oh, I'm going to do something with these like groups of five that I already have in the thing, and I'm going to keep writing this and this and this. Just didn't happen. It didn't happen. And I started playing through these chords, and it seemed like a cool resolution for the piece to get into. And I think that's also where the name eventually came from, because it felt like this thing that everyone can kind of sing together, and like somehow of an optimistic characteristic to that part.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was pretty, it was funny because, as I was listening to it, I was thinking, where is this going to go? You had this beautiful guitar line in the beginning. I assume it's finger picked, right?
Yeah, it's fingerpicked, yeah.
And, uh, and then all of a sudden, there's like a little bit of this dissonance, and then these kind of like very heavy quarter notes, like you mentioned. And it was like, wow, man, this took a direction. I It was cool, but it was like somewhat unexpected. And
Yeah,
it was interesting to hear how it developed and kind of definitely a unique choice, but it really works.
nice. That's awesome. I mean, I think in a way it feels like two songs in one, and sometimes those things just work when they're like side by side. But I think it brought a nice contrast to the album in the sense that a lot of the songs also stay in a similar area in some ways, and this one is just like we were here, and
Mhm.
then it just shifted, and then you're there for a while. So
Yeah, yeah, I got that sense, almost like it was two movements, within one
nice.
composition. Yeah, very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
So that one is going to be released February 24th,
True.
and record label is Andrea Europa Records, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is great. I have a record coming out uh, this month on that label.
Oh, hell yeah.
So, yeah,
Amazing. Congrats.
thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then the other single set to be released March 10th is called Tritonal. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the name makes a lot of sense, but uh, you can just talk about sort of how this song came to be.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so that's the name just ended up being what it was called as a reference to, like the technique it was written that I used to write it. And that one came out very, very quickly. It was in the middle of the pandemic. I believe Kurt Rosenwinkel did like a Zoom composition masterclass talking about all of his music, like 3 hour session.
Right.
Um, and I'm a big fan. Like I grew up on his music, so having that like opportunity was pretty cool. And one of the things he demonstrated was this song called Cubism, where he's basically it's a 12 bar form, and every bar is in a different tonality. It follows like four different combinations of the tritonal cycle, right? Of like tonal centers that are separated by a major third, basically. But what he was doing, it was like compared to something like giant steps, or countdown. He was using those tonalities much more freely. It didn't have to be the one of the scale. It didn't have to be like a dominant to the one or a 2/5 to the one, like you would expect from like jazz progressions. It was like just pick any color you want from that tonality to represent it. So later I sat down and I was like, okay, let me do the exact same thing. I started with C major, just like played some chords. And I think I let the melody lead me, and hopefully that's the thing that makes this song kind of work very strongly, is that even though I do represent all of the 12 keys in the A section,
Mm.
I feel like the melody hopefully can kind of tie it together because it uses a lot of common tones, even without me noticing. It was just an ear thing, I think. Um, and I remember also that the first, I'm not a big computer guy. Like I don't use a lot of like tech stuff and whatever. All my demos are like on my voice memos on my phone.
Yeah,
I struggle with like production software. Now I got a little better at it, but it's not really my thing. But I remember that this first demo was literally with like an Ableton basic like pack of like some sort of like drum groove in 4/4 that then I played all these meters on, and I felt it was really cool. So almost like we kind of kept that vibe in a way of just something very driving, that on
right.
top of it there's all these syncopations that change but are based on like pretty similar figures that come in and out in that way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is. It does sound pretty intricate. I just do a lot of your songs in terms of like the rhythmic concepts. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. Again, really cool, and it's interesting that you mentioned Kurt Rosenwait. He was recently a guest on the program,
Oh, nice.
and
Awesome.
uh, and I did an article for him on Downbeat. So I do hear, some. I was going to ask you because there seems to be a little bit of an Kurt Rosenwinkel influence to some of your stuff. And part of my one of my questions I have for you is if you could talk about some of your other influences. First, maybe your playing, and then composition as well.
Sure, sure. That's great. Well, there are a lot. If I'm thinking of guitarists, there are a few that come to mind. But I would say that actually, funnily, like the first jazz band I really ever heard, thanks to my teacher who introduced it to me back in high school, was the Jazz Messengers. And the Jazz Messengers, I feel like, I mean, it doesn't get any better than that in terms of like a band sound and arranging and orchestration, and every soloist is incredible. And I think that Wayne Shorter, like through those recordings, for me, at first and then even more so, he was a voice that I just somehow couldn't ignore because of how melodic, how powerful, how unique every solo was, every presentation of a melody. Um, so that's something that like I really admire in all of his career. He had that quality, like so, it was so transparent, that like lyricism that came out of him. So he was a big one in the beginning. Of course, Wes Montgomery and like stuff like that when I was more, into more straight ahead stuff. The first big influence for me was Pat Metheny, honestly. He was the one who really pulled me into jazz. And, like some people would say, well, that's not exactly jazz or this and this. But no, it was my gateway to jazz, mostly through the group, but then the trio recordings and whatever. And I remember one of my teachers also told me at some point, like, dude, you gotta stop. You gotta stop listening to Pat, because
Yeah,
I knew all the licks, I knew all the solos by heart. I had a really good friend at the time who was an amazing jazz pianist that we both were addicted to, like Lyle Mays and Pat, and knew everything.
mhm.
Um, but same thing for the lyricism and like super personal sound, great groove. Like I mean, Pat is incredible. I could talk about him for a while, but he was the one that I was obsessed with. Then Kurt, kind of at the same time, started coming in, both as a guitarist, but also a lot as a composer. I think the sense of like, and he talked about it a lot in the masterclass, like trying to tap into something that is more otherworldly, almost like a dreamscape type of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
He actually said, I don't know if you guys talked about it, but he said he had a practice of trying to wake up and extending the dream state further into the day.
No, he didn't. He didn't mention
Which I
that.
thought was really cool, and you can tell that like some of these things are really like,
Yeah,
wow, what is this soundscape? And I think that both him and Pat have that very strongly in like their compositional world, and that was a big influence whether I knew it or not. Gilad Hexelman, incredible. I definitely was transcribing a ton of his stuff, and the way he thinks like about counterpoint and playing multiple roles at the same time, that was really inspiring for me rhythmically, melodically, also compositionally. Julian Lage, I loved. Um, the best acoustic sound, I think, from like modern players when he was playing on that Manzer guitar, like the first couple of records with his group. Um, then there are a lot. I mean, Jim Hall, Ahmad Jamal, like all these people that are, for me, true improvisers, but also think about the vibe of the whole piece. I think they were very, very big. And at the same time, a lot of other stuff. I grew up listening to like rock music too. I have one band, Kadawa, that we do like things that more lean into that. I don't know. There's many.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, does Bill Frisell filter into your whole thing as well?
Definitely,
Yeah,
definitely. I think I got to Frizzell a little later, and I think as someone like coming up and just like really, really studying and whatever, at least for me, or maybe it's also a guitar thing. I think a lot of guitarists tend to go for the flashy,
yes,
technical, very soloistic type of approach.
right.
Um, and Bill was more of a mystery to me at first. I think I didn't really understand until I started to listening to all the other aspects of his playing and like the movement within his sound that like some teacher of mine kind of opened my eyes to, and just how expressive every note is, his choice of sound and like voicings, accompaniment, like it's all super unique, but I think you need to learn to kind of embrace that side too, of just
Yeah,
being patient and minimal, letting things ring. So those are a lot of things I took from him, using open strings, harmonics, like those kind of textures that he does so well. Like there's always an ambience and something kind of resonating when he plays.
yeah,
Um, so him I love. Ben Monder, also love his stuff, and harmonically insane, and definitely a couple of records that influenced me. Also, the guy that mixed the record, Joe Brankiford, I got to him through the Monder record, Hydra, that I loved. So I was like, what is this mix? I have to work with this guy. You know?
nice, very
Yeah.
cool. So, you mentioned like your upbringing a little bit, or I would like to talk about your upbringing a little bit. So you were
Yeah.
born in Israel?
Yeah, born in Israel, and I was there until I was 21. When I was 21, I moved to New York to finish undergrad at the new school. But until then, I was in Israel.
Okay, and what was the jazz scene, or was there a jazz scene, or is there a jazz scene in Israel?
Yeah, man, it's incredible. I honestly feel so lucky that I grew up there at this time. I think if it was like 10, 15 years before, I wouldn't be where I am, and it's thanks to so many incredible musicians who had the courage to move to New York before there was a collaboration between institutions and there were more Israeli musicians in New York. So there were a bunch of them. Amit Golan, who since passed away, but he was the founder of the jazz center that I went to college at in Tel Aviv, the Center for Jazz Studies at the Israeli Conservatory of Music. Um, and he started this program and initiated the collaboration with the new school so we can do 2 years in Tel Aviv and then kind of audition. We even auditioned for the new school in Tel Aviv. They came to like hear us there, which made it much easier. But him, a bunch of other amazing musicians, Erez Barnoy, who's a sax player who actually also passed away. Um, but so many amazing people. Harel Shachal, who was teaching at the new school and came back, and Yuval Cohen and Gilad Ronen and Omri Moore. Like I could keep talking about these guys, but I think they really set us up for success because they did the hard work in New York themselves and like took in all
Mhm.
this information, and then we're able to just create an amazing learning environment, filled with like so many incredible musicians from all over the country, and I think they really like kind of catapulted me forward. My case was a little different than a lot of people in the program because there's also a really successful arts high school called Tal Yahalom, which a lot of people come from, and it's like a jazz paradise. Like, I met all these people only in college because I came from like a much smaller place, but I was like, I don't know how to play jazz. Like, they know how to play jazz. That's how I felt, you know. I didn't have a hollow body. I had a Strat at the time, so I was that guy from like the middle of nowhere who is now playing jazz. Um, but it's a very nice scene. There's an amazing venue that I used to play at when I was in college, called Bet Ha'amudim, like the House of Pillars, and that was selected by Downbeat, like for like one of the best jazz clubs in the world. Da, da, da. Awesome people that run it and give a lot of opportunities for young people. I led my first bands there. Um, there are cool workshops you can take in the summer. I took a couple with like Rimon School, which is kind of the parallel college of where I went to in Tel Aviv. Amazing musicians, not enough venues, which is the case, I think, in most places. So.
Yes, that is that is true.
And now
So
it's even getting worse since the pandemic. It just like
right,
things are just closing one by one. So,
it's a
yeah.
shame. So do you ever foresee going back there to live?
Man, I don't know. It's honestly a hard question for me because, for sure, what I know is that I want to give back in some way, and I think that way would mostly be an educational way. I always had like some idea of being incorporated into a program there, or maybe even starting a little thing, whether if it's just for guitarists or more extended. Maybe be able to like bring some cool music because of people I know in New York back
Mhm.
there, you know, and like curate some stuff. I don't see myself living there anytime soon. It's also a very harsh reality, obviously, right now in the region, and it's crazy. And yeah, I'm not sure if it's gonna happen. I would really like to. I would really like to at some point, but I think I still have some things to do in New York, and actually now I'm also in Brazil, and that is opening up a lot of things for me. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, so was family of musicians, or were you the only musician in the family?
Not really. The only musician kind of was my dad's mother, who was kind of a music teacher for primary school, played some accordion, some piano,
Right.
some recorders, you know, had a collection of like recorders. But she died when I was pretty young, like 13 or 14, so we didn't get to exchange a lot of musical experiences. My mom played as a kid like clarinet, and she was great, and she can still sight read some stuff on like recorder or whatever. But that's as far as it goes. Like, they're music lovers, my parents for sure, and also my grandparents. But it wasn't jazz, you know. It was like classic rock, like Zeppelin, Deep Purple, the Beatles, Pink Floyd was really big. My dad loves old time Israeli music. Like, whenever he would be in the car, he would put the radio on that and sing like songs from like the '60s or whatever.
Yeah.
So there was music around, but no one really played. There weren't really any instruments. I think we had a piano at some point after I started, but yeah, pretty much me.
Yeah. So, so you were in Israel. You said I think till what age was it?
21.
Oh, okay, so you served in the military there as well.
I did, and I also feel super lucky with that because, you know, most people, they need to pause with music and sometimes don't even get back to it, especially if they're combat soldiers or whatever. And luckily, my physical profile wasn't fit to be a combat soldier, which is a relief if you're trying to be a musician. Uh, and the military actually has a program for excelling musicians and also athletes. So I got the status of like excelling jazz musician, which basically allowed me to do the college program I mentioned before at the same time. Because I was only doing like up to 6 hours a day at the military, and most times it was less because my job was kind of like community service. I was just performing with different ensembles for like senior homes and hospitals and like schools for kids with like special needs and some military ceremonies every now and then. It was still very limiting, but it was the best case scenario. I also could take like special leave when I had like a good musical reason that would support my career. So I went to the Siena Jazz workshops in Italy twice because of that. And when there were artists in residence from New York coming to the jazz program, we had like a full week with them, like people like Malgru Miller and like Semi Hell, really cool people. Or Pat Metheny was there for a master class, so I could take special leave for those occasions, you know.
Cool. And then so what brought you to New York? Was it school going to new school, or you just had designs of going to New York and that was just the way to go?
Right, right. I think, it was clear that I wanted to go to New York already when I was like 18.
Hmm.
And then the college program just seemed like the best idea. Um, so that was the way to kind of get like the student visa, and it was a great environment to meet people. I definitely wanted to be in school. I actually feel like a lot of people, they don't like school or they don't like especially jazz school. For me, I think it was the perfect time because I also didn't, again, I came from a small place. I knew maybe one and a half people who play jazz where I was.
One and a
Okay?
half. Okay.
One and a half. Because, like it was jazz, but it was. And for me, both in Tel Aviv and at the new school, it was just this opportunity of like, okay, now I'm meeting my people finally. Before I wasn't even around like-minded people. Um, and I feel like I like the environment of just being like super focused on studying, and it's actually once you leave you're like, oh man, there's so much more I need to handle in life after. So the amount of practicing I put in there and like the amount of studies I did, it was great. And the new school is also very diverse, so I could get into different things that were not just pure jazz. Like I got into Brazilian music actually at the new school. I took like a shore ensemble there and the music of Hermeto Pascual, and I took like an M bass class like based on the music of Steve Coleman with Andy Milne, which was awesome. Orchestration, all these kind of stuff. So it was cool, but of course it was a lot just to be in New York because that's the place to be, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And are right now living in Manhattan, or where are you?
I live in Brooklyn. I'm right off the Prospect Park stop and facing the park, which is super nice because honestly, I don't know how people who don't have the proximity to that park or other parks in New York do it, because it can be hard otherwise. For me, if I'm between like practicing sessions or teaching or whatever, I
Mhm.
go for a walk for half an hour. I just cross the street, and it helps me a lot. Otherwise, it'll be tough.
Yeah, yeah. So for you, it's all music all the time. So it's performance and teaching. That's how you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I always somehow ended up making it work that way, and I feel lucky that I like to teach a lot. So it's something that is able to also pay the bills, but also connects me with people from many different places. During the pandemic, it was the peak. I loved it because I offered introductory like Zoom lessons, and I had like a student from New Zealand. I had someone from like, I don't know, Canada, and then like so many different places. And especially now with the online market, as we're doing also this interview, it's made everything so much more possible. So yeah, I love it, and I have even some ideas on how to expand on that part, but that's maybe a different conversation.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's cool. So, my final question that I had prepared was, what are some future projects you have on?
Right. Well, I have two things that are already kind of materializing. One thing is a new collaboration with an incredible singer who moved to New York 2 years ago, Danielle Wirtz. She's originally from DC but lived in California for a while. And we became very close and started actually writing songs together collaboratively and arranging everything together. So that's a first for me too, like writing lyrics for that. I was also singing even a little bit on that when we did the debut at the Jazz Gallery not too long ago. So that's definitely something I want to focus on and see where it goes. I like also intimate settings where, again, the guitar could be many things. So this is kind of a different version of that. And she's really incredible to work with. You should definitely listen to her stuff. And then we'll see. There are a couple of ideas. I do have a bunch of solo records out, and I think one more is maybe materializing around more of like the South American and especially Brazilian sort of stuff. Maybe all on nylon string, like very exposed. So that could happen. And we'll see. Writing some new music for the quintet after we play this cycle. We'll see where it goes. You know.
Yeah, well, I wish you the best of luck, and I hope people check out the record. It's called Mirror Image, NGO Europa Records, and of course, it'll be on all the streaming services, I would imagine. All right.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank
cool.
you so
Well,
much.
I'm here at the Jersey Shore, not too far from here. Or maybe I'll
Yeah.
pass across. Maybe we'll do some playing sometime.
Please, that'll be awesome. I would love to come by. It looks like a super cool space. So at some
Oh,
point.
this is my baby. But I do have a studio where we have a baby
Nice,
grand
nice.
piano and run a bunch of sessions here in New Jersey. So uh,
Cool. Do you ever have coming stuff coming up in New York? Do you ever?
what I rarely play much in New York, mostly because of the cost to get there from here.
Yeah.
I do get opportunities to, but they've been it's rare lately, but it's not uncommon. I do make it.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah.
Nice.
Uh,
I'll look out for that then.
Yeah,
Also.
surprisingly, there's a lot of opportunity in my area, Asbury Park, Red Bank. There's a lot of gigs, which allows me to, and there's a good amount of really solid musicians, which is I'm very thankful. But it's
Yeah.
not far from me to go.
Incredible. Nice,
Um,
man.
yeah, what did I miss? Anything else you want people to know?
I don't know. Come check out the release shows and listen to the record the whole way through. That's the way I believe in it. So when it comes out, if you get to check it out, that's the way to do it.
Absolutely, man. Cool. All right, hey, it was nice talking to you.
Hey,
Hopefully,
awesome talking to you. Thanks for having me on. Super
my
fun.
pleasure. And we'll probably release this one closer to the date of the record. But I'll let you know.
Sure. Awesome.
Excellent. All right. Have a great day.
Cool, man. Take care. Thanks so much.